Chapter 1. The Hook. She crawled across the wet marble on bleeding knees, while 1,000 silent nobles held their breath. Rain hammered the high windows. The crown hovered above his head, gold and heavy, ready to fall. She pulled her hood lower and pushed forward through the wet hem of her own dress. A guard moved to stop her. She lifted one finger. The guard froze like a man, hearing his mother's voice from a grave. She climbed the lowest step. She climbed the second. Her bare palm left a red print on the white stone. He turned his head and saw her. He did not move. He did not breathe. She rose to her full height in front of the kneeling boy and pressed her mouth to his ear. Then Liana whispered 4 words that broke an empire. What would you have done in her place? Tap subscribe and tell me below. Chapter 2. The Setup. The kingdom of Vasselmore sat in a long valley between 2 black ranges that nobody had ever fully mapped. Old maps lied. Newer maps lied harder. The capital pressed itself against the southern cliffs like a hand gripping a knife. Towers grew out of the rock. Bridges crossed gorges that swallowed sound. Travelers said the wind here remembered names. Travelers said a lot of things, and most of them turned out to be true. For 300 years, the throne had belonged to the House of Veyr. The Veyrs were tall and dark and quiet. They ruled with cold patience and never picked fights they could not finish. They were also something else. Nobody said the word in daylight. Servants said it behind closed doors when the candles burned low. The Veyrs did not age the way other men aged. They did not bleed the way other men bled. They drank red wine from black cups, and they hosted feasts that ended before the food cooled. The current king had died 2 winters ago in the kind of accident that fools believe and clever people study twice. A hunting trip. A wounded boar. A clean wound in the throat where no boar tusk had ever reached. The king's brother stepped into the empty chair without raising his voice. He held the regency for a single year, then began carving the council the way a farmer carves a goose. By the time the boy heir came of age, half the old families were ash and the other half were friends. The boy heir was named Adrian. He was 19. He was tall like his father and quiet like his mother, and he had eyes the color of a frozen river. He had been raised in a tower above the inner courtyard, taught by tutors who never met his uncle, taught languages and law and the names of every star. He had been taught one other thing, but only in whispers and only in the dark, and he had been told never to repeat it. He had not repeated it. He had also not forgotten it. In the lower city, far below the cliffs, there was a quarter of the maps called the Hollow. It was not on the maps the king kept. It was on the maps the smugglers kept. The Hollow was where a girl named Liana grew up. She was the daughter of nobody she could name. She had a face the women called too pretty to keep, and the men called too quiet to trust. She lived in the attic of a wash house and earned her bread by hauling sheets for a widow who beat her only when drunk. Liana had 2 things that did not match her station. The first was a small black ring she kept on a string under her dress, a ring with a flat oval face and a coat of arms scratched away so badly it could not be read. The second was a habit of dreaming about places she had never seen. She dreamed of a chapel under the ground with a black altar. She dreamed of a tall woman with her own face but older. She dreamed of a man with a wound in his throat who said her name and did not bleed. The widow died on a wet Tuesday. The wash house was sold within a week to a wool merchant who did not need an attic girl. Liana packed her 2 dresses and her 1 cup and walked out into a rain that did not stop for 9 days. She slept on her bridges. She slept in barns. She slept in the back room of a tavern in exchange for sweeping ash until her hands turned gray. She heard the same news in every village she passed. The young King Adrian was to be crowned at the end of the month. The whole valley was going to the capital. The roads were thick with people who wanted to be present at the moment a Veyr touched the crown. Liana did not know why she walked toward the capital. She told herself it was for the work. There would be kitchens. There would be stables. There would be 1,000 small jobs for a girl with strong arms and a quiet mouth. But under that reason, there was another reason she did not look at directly. The dreams had been getting worse. The tall woman with her face had started to speak. The tall woman had told her, 3 nights running, to be in the great hall on the day of the crown. The tall woman had not said why. On the road to the capital, Liana met an old man with a wagon full of beets. He let her ride for 2 days in exchange for company. He told her stories. He told her the Vair kings were not what the priests said they were. He told her there was a true line and a false line, and the true line had been hidden after a betrayal 300 years old. He told her there was a child born to the wrong woman in the right blood, and that child was sent down into the hollow with a ring around its neck. He told her that ring would burn cold on the right hand on the right day. Liana did not answer him. When he dropped her at the south gate, he caught her wrist and looked at her too long. He said, "Your dreams are not your dreams." He said, "When the crown rises, you go forward, not back." Then he climbed into his wagon and drove away, and she never saw him again. She entered the capital on the morning of the crowning. The streets were already full. Banners hung from every window. The bells in the high towers had begun to ring. Liana stood at the edge of the crowd and felt the ring at her throat grow cold. Chapter 3. The Inciting. The great hall of Vasselmore could hold 4,000 people standing, and it was past full. They had opened the side doors. They had opened the cloister doors. They had even cracked the small dark service door behind the eastern pillars, the one only the kitchen staff knew about, because the Lord Chamberlain had decided that today every soul who could squeeze inside would squeeze inside. He wanted witnesses. The uncle who had ruled as regent wanted witnesses. A coronation scene by 10,000 mouths could not be undone by 10,000 whispers later. Liana slipped in through the kitchen door because she walked behind a serving girl carrying a tray of cups, and nobody questioned a second girl behind a tray. She kept her hood up. She kept her eyes down. The serving girl turned left toward the long tables. Liana turned right toward the pillars. From between 2 pillars, she watched the hall fill. The nobles came in by rank, the oldest houses first. They wore the colors of their banners and the gold of their fortunes, and they bowed to nobody. Behind the nobles came the high priests in white. Behind the priests came the foreign envoys, 10 of them, each in a different cut of coat. Behind the envoys came the city masters, the trade guilds, the army captains. Last came the regent. He walked alone down the long aisle. He was a tall man with a tight mouth and silver in his black hair, and he did not look at anyone, and everyone looked at him. Then came the boy. Adrian Vayer walked through the high doors in a long black coat over a white shirt. He wore no jewelry. He wore no crown yet. He wore his own face, and his face was not the face the city had been told to expect. The city had been told to expect a boy. They got a man. He was tall like a soldier and pale like a candle, and his eyes did not move the way other eyes moved. He did not look at his uncle. He did not look at the priests. He looked once at the dark spaces between the pillars on the eastern side of the hall. Liana felt that look land on her like a hand on her chest. She could not have been seen. She was deep in shadow. She was wearing wet brown wool. But Adrian Vayer had looked into the shadow, and he had paused for one half breath before he kept walking. Nobody else noticed. She noticed. She did not know yet that he had noticed her in the same way a man notices his own reflection in a window he did not know was there. The ceremony began. The high priest spoke the old words. The old words were long. The old words spoke of duty and of blood and of the unbroken line, and at the word line the priest's voice caught for half a second and then recovered, and Liana saw the regent's mouth tighten and then loosen. There was a thing under the words that the priest knew, and that the regent knew, and that the boy knew, and none of them were saying it out loud. Adrian knelt. The priest lifted the crown from the velvet cushion. It was a thin gold band, much smaller than people expected, with 7 black stones around it. The stones were not jewels. The stones were older than jewels. Liana could feel the ring under her dress turn, so cold it burned. She stepped out from behind the pillar. She did not know she was going to step out. Her feet stepped out. Her body stepped out. The dreams had been telling her for weeks, and her body had finally listened. She walked along the eastern wall behind the line of standing nobles, and nobody turned. She walked past the foreign envoys, and one of them, a small woman in green, met her eyes and did not raise an alarm. She walked into the open aisle. That was when the hall noticed her. A murmur ran along the rows like wind through wheat. A guard near the dais stepped forward. The captain of the guard lifted his hand to stop the first guard, because the captain had been trained to wait for orders from the regent before drawing steel in the great hall during a coronation. The regent did not give the order. The regent was watching her face under the hood, and his mouth had gone very still. Liana later thought he had known. She thought he had known her face the moment her hood slipped back 2 inches. She thought he had also known that any order he gave now would be the wrong order. Liana kept walking. She reached the steps of the dais. She knelt on the first step. The marble bit into her knees. She pulled the ring on its string out of her collar and let it hang in plain sight. The 7 black stones in the crown turned. They actually turned, all 7 of them, like 7 small eyes opening at once. The priest let out a small sound that was not a word. Adrien Veyer stayed kneeling. He was watching her. She rose. She climbed the 2nd step. She climbed the 3rd. She stood face to face with the kneeling king. She lifted her hand, and the captain of the guard, the same captain who had stopped the first guard, made the smallest gesture, palm down, and his men did not move. Later, that captain would be hanged for that gesture. Later, Liana would weep for him. Now she did not look at him. She looked at the boy in front of her. She bent. She put her mouth to his ear. She said 4 words. The 4 words were not spoken loudly. They were not heard by the priest. They were not heard by the regent. They were heard by Adrien Veyer, and they went into him like a knife going into water, and his eyes changed color. They had been gray. They went black. The priest, holding the crown in midair, felt the gold shiver in his hands and almost dropped it. Liana stepped back down 1 step. She kept her eyes on Adrian's eyes. She did not bow. She did not run. The hall had gone past silent into something else, a held breath quiet that you only get in places where 4,000 people are simultaneously deciding whether to scream. The regent finally spoke. His voice was light and almost kind. He said, "Who is this child?" He said it like a man asking after a stray cat. Adrien Veyer stood up from his kneel. The priest lowered the crown. Adrien did not take the crown. Adrien did not look at his uncle. Adrien looked at Liana and he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall without him raising it, "She is the only person in this room who has not lied to me." The hall did not erupt. The hall went into the false calm. The kind of calm where you can hear a single candle flame burning 30 paces away. The kind of calm a kingdom makes in the half-second before it tears itself in half. The regent smiled. The regent's smile was the smile of a man who had prepared for this exact half-second for 19 years and had 100 men waiting in the next corridor. The 7 black stones in the crown stopped turning. Outside, the bells in the high towers had been ringing the whole time, and just then, all at once, the bells stopped. Chapter 4. The Escalation. The regent's hand moved 1 inch, and 40 men in black surcoats stepped through the side doors at the same instant. They had been waiting in the cloister all morning. They moved fast and they moved together, and they had crossbows already cranked. The crowd in the great hall finally understood what they had walked into, and they began to scream and run. And screaming and running in a packed hall is a way for many people to die for no reason. Liana did not move. Adrien did not move. If this story is hitting you, hit the subscribe button now, because what comes next is the part the official histories cut out. The captain of the guard who had stopped his men, with a palm-down gesture, drew his sword. He drew it slowly so that everyone could see him draw it. He turned not toward Liana but toward the regent. He said, "My king is the boy." He said it loud enough for the back of the hall to hear. 8 of his men turned with him. The other 12 did not. Steel met steel on the polished floor, and the first man went down before the priest could finish drawing breath to pray. Adrian stepped down from the dais. He did not run. He took Liana's hand. His hand was cold. His hand was the same temperature as her ring. He pulled her behind him and he walked, calm as a man crossing his own garden, toward the eastern pillars. The regent shouted an order. 3 crossbowmen lifted their weapons. 3 crossbowmen suddenly could not lift their arms above their shoulders. They tried. They strained. The bows shook. The bolts did not fly. Adrian Veyer had not looked at them. He had simply walked, and somewhere between the dais and the pillars, he had decided that those 3 men would not shoot, and those 3 men did not shoot. Liana finally understood what she had whispered. She had whispered the name. The real name. The hidden name of the true line, the name the priest had stumbled over in the old words. She had not learned that name from any book. She had learned it from the tall woman with her face who had stood beside her bed every night for 3 months. She had said it into Adrian's ear, and the name had unlocked the thing in his blood the way a key unlocks a door, and now the thing in his blood was awake, and 40 men in black surcoats were learning what awake looked like. A bolt struck a pillar 2 inches from Liana's head. She did not flinch. She had stopped flinching at the moment the bells stopped ringing. Adrian pulled her through the kitchen door, the same door she had come in through. The kitchen staff had already fled. Pots boiled on empty stoves. A roast burned. They went through the kitchen and down a stair and into a corridor that Liana did not know existed and that, by the layout of the palace from the outside, should not have existed. The corridor was lit by candles that no one was tending, and that did not gutter when they ran past. Behind them the hall was war. Men shouted. Women screamed. The captain of the guard who had named his king was already dead, but his 8 men were still fighting, and other men nobody had counted, had stepped out of the crowd with daggers under their cloaks. The regent had prepared for 1 fight. He had not prepared for 3. The old houses he had carved had children, and those children had remembered. Adrian led her down. They went down 4 flights. They went past a door marked with a hand. They went past a door marked with an eye. They reached a door marked with 7 black dots in a circle, and that door opened by itself when Adrian put his palm flat against the wood. The room beyond was the chapel from her dreams. The black altar was there. The candles were there. The cold smell of stone and old iron was there, exactly as she had dreamed it, down to the way the 3rd candle from the left guttered when the door opened. Adrian closed the door behind them. He turned. He looked at her properly for the first time, not as a stranger in a hall but as a person in a room. His eyes were still black. He said, "Who told you the name?" Liana said, "A woman with my face." Adrian said, "That was my grandmother." Liana said, "I know." Adrian said, "She has been dead for 60 years." Liana said, "I know." They stood looking at each other. Above them, faintly, the sound of the fight in the great hall came down through the stone like distant weather. The first payoff of the day had landed. The regent's clean coronation was already in pieces. But the larger payoff, the one Liana had been walking toward since the day the widow died, was still ahead. Adrian took the ring off her string. He did not pull. The string parted on its own. He turned the ring over in his palm. The scratched-away coat of arms was no longer scratched away. The metal had healed. The arms showed clearly now. They were the arms of the true line. The line the regent's grandfather had murdered. The line that had been hidden in a wash-house in the hollow for 3 generations, until a girl with the right blood walked back into the right hall on the right day. Adrian slid the ring onto her thumb because it was too big for any other finger. He said, "You are my cousin." Liana said, "I know." He said, "You are also the heir senior to me by birth." She said, "I'm not here for the chair." He said, "I know." He said it the way she had been saying it. They had been finishing each other's sentences for 2 minutes, and they had known each other for 10. Above them a horn sounded. Then a second horn. Then a third. The third horn was the horn of the Eastern Garrison, and the Eastern Garrison answered only to the captain of the guard, and the captain of the guard was dead. Somebody else had blown his horn. Somebody else had taken his place. The fight in the Great Hall was no longer a fight in the Great Hall. It had spilled into the courtyards. It had spilled into the streets. The capital was choosing sides in real time, and the sides were not the sides the region had counted. Adrian said, "We have to go up." Liana said, "I thought we came down to hide." Adrian said, "We came down to wake something." He looked at the black altar. He said, "My grandmother is not finished." Chapter 5. The Payoff. Liana put her hand on the altar because Adrian put his hand on the altar, and she was no longer in the business of waiting for instructions. The stone was warm. The stone should have been cold. Under her palm she felt a slow beat, like a pulse, but slower than any pulse a living thing should have. She understood without being told that she was feeling the heart of the line. Not the heart of a person. The heart of a bloodline. A thing the Veyers had buried under their own chapel 3 centuries ago, because they had been afraid of it and had not been brave enough to destroy it. The 7 candles around the altar leaned toward the center, as if a wind blew from all directions at once. The flames did not go out. They braided into a single tall flame above the stone. Inside the flame, Liana saw a woman. The woman had her face. Older, tired, kind. The grandmother. Adrian's grandmother. Her own great something. The math did not matter, the blood did. The woman in the flame smiled at Liana the way a person smiles at the end of a long wait. The woman in the flame said, "You came." Liana said, "You called." The woman said, "Then take it." Liana said, "Take what?" The woman said, "What they buried." Adrian put his hand over Liana's on the stone. He nodded once. Liana pressed down. The altar split, not broken, just opened like a book opening. Inside the hollow under the altar was a second crown. It was not the gold crown the priest had been holding. This crown was iron. Plain dark iron with no stones at all, just a thin band, the kind of thing a soldier might hammer out by a campfire. It was the original. The first crown. The crown the true line had worn before the betrayal. The crown the false line had hidden, because they could not destroy it and could not wear it. Liana lifted it. It weighed nothing in her hand. It weighed everything in her chest. She understood, in the way you understand a dream while you are still inside it, that this object did not choose her because she was older born or because her ring had healed. It chose her because she had crawled across a marble floor on bleeding knees in front of 4,000 people to tell a stranger the truth. It chose her because she had walked into a hall that wanted her dead and had not flinched when the bells stopped. She did not put it on her own head. She turned. She put it on Adrian's head. He looked at her. He did not speak. The iron band sat on his black hair, and the black candles bent toward him. The fire above the altar pulled in on itself and went out, and the chapel went very dark, and in the dark Liana heard Adrian laugh once, very quietly, the way a man laughs when he has just put down a weight he has carried since he was a child. He said, "Why me?" She said, "Because you are the one who stayed when the truth walked into the room." She said, "The chair is yours. The blood is mine. We do this together, or it does not get done." Adrian said, "Agreed." They went up. The corridor that should not have existed put them out behind the great hall, in a courtyard above the cloister. The courtyard was full of fighting men. The fighting men saw the iron crown and stopped fighting. Even the regent's men stopped, just for a half-breath, because the iron crown was a thing their grandfathers had told them about by firelight, and they had not believed, and now it was here. The regent himself came out onto a balcony above the courtyard. He had a sword in his hand. He had not held a sword in 20 years. He looked down at his nephew wearing the iron crown, and at the wash-house girl with the healed ring on her thumb. He understood everything in about 2 seconds. He smiled the same prepared smile from before. He said, "You cannot have a queen who has been a servant." He said it to the courtyard, not to them. He was still trying to win the witnesses. Liana looked up at him. She did not raise her voice. She said, "I am not the queen." She lifted the ring on her thumb so the courtyard could see it. She said, "I am the witness. The chair belongs to the man wearing the iron. The blood belongs to me. The choice belongs to the city." The courtyard understood what she had done in pieces, the way a crowd always understands. The faceless girl from nowhere was not asking for power. She was placing power in plain view and stepping back from it. That was the move the regent had not prepared for. The regent had prepared for a rival. He had not prepared for a witness. The regent did the only thing left to him. He threw his sword. He threw it well. He had been a soldier once, and the sword went straight at Adrian's chest. Liana stepped in front of Adrian, because her body stepped in front of him before her head decided. The sword went into her shoulder and out the other side. She did not fall. The thing in her blood, the thing the 4 words had unlocked in Adrian, was also in her, and it held her up the way a hand holds up a candle in a draft. Adrian caught her. He pulled the sword out. The wound closed before the blade was fully clear. He held her against him, and he looked up at the regent on the balcony, and he did not say anything. He did not have to. The captain who had blown the 3rd horn came up the courtyard stair behind the regent, and he did not say anything either. He simply took the regent by the elbow, very gently, the way a son takes a father who has been drinking. The regent did not resist. He had already lost. He had lost at the moment Liana stepped in front of the sword. The fighting in the courtyard stopped. The fighting in the great hall, hearing the courtyard go quiet, stopped a minute later. The fighting in the streets, hearing the great hall go quiet, stopped within an hour. By sundown, the capital was the capital again, but it was a different capital, and everyone in it knew it. Chapter 6. The Resolution. The regent was not killed. Liana asked for him to be kept alive. Adrian did not argue. The regent was sent to a small fortress in the northern mountains where the wind already remembered names, and he lived there for 9 more years, and he wrote letters every week to a nephew who never answered them, and when he died a guard found him at his desk with a pen still in his hand and a half-finished sentence on the page. The half-finished sentence was the start of an apology. Nobody published it. Liana kept it. Adrian was crowned a second time 3 days after the first. The second crowning was quiet. No banners. No envoys. No 4,000 witnesses. Just the iron band already on his head, and the priest who had nearly dropped the gold crown, and Liana standing at his right hand in a clean gray dress with the ring on her thumb. The priest who had spent 3 sleepless nights deciding what to say said only, "The line is whole." The line was whole. The Vair King stopped being 2 things at once. They became one thing openly. The thing in the blood was no longer a rumor in the kitchens. It was acknowledged in the law. It came with rules. Liana wrote most of the rules. She had grown up in a wash house, and she knew exactly how a person in power could ruin a person without power without ever raising a hand, and she wrote rules that made that harder. The old houses did not love her rules. The old houses also did not say so out loud, because the wash house girl had stepped in front of a sword for the king, and the city had not forgotten. Adrian and Liana were not married. The court expected it. The envoys expected it. The priests with some throat-clearing expected it. They did not marry. They were cousins of a kind that the new rules did not allow. They were also something more useful to a kingdom than a married couple. They were a king and a witness, and a kingdom that has both of those in the open, with the iron on one head and the ring on the other thumb, is a kingdom that is hard to lie to. Liana built a school in the hollow. She built it on the site of the wash house. The widow who had beaten her was long dead, and the wool merchant who had bought the building took a fair price and did not argue. The school taught reading to girls who hauled sheets and boys who swept ash. The school taught one other thing, in a small room at the back, to a small number of carefully chosen students. It taught how to recognize a true line from a false one. It taught how to walk through a hall that wanted you dead. It taught the 4 words, but only to those who would not say them. Adrian ruled for 41 years. He aged. He aged slowly, the way the Veyers always had, but he aged. He died in his own bed, with Liana's hand in his. He did not bleed at the end. He simply got quiet, the way a candle gets quiet when the wax runs out. Liana was old by then too, though her face was still the face from the flame in the chapel, and people in the capital had stopped being surprised by that a long time ago. She lived 9 more years. She wrote down everything. She wrote down the wash house. She wrote down the road in the rain. She wrote down the old man with the beets and the small woman in green who had not raised the alarm, and the captain of the guard who had given the palm down sign and died for it. She wrote down the 4 words at the end, and she sealed that page inside a stone in the chapel under the altar, and the seal has not been broken yet, and the stone is still there. Visitors are allowed to touch it. Most do not. In the school in the hollow, there is a painting on the back wall of the small room. The painting shows a girl in wet brown wool walking up a marble step toward a kneeling king. The girl's knees are bleeding. The king has not yet seen her. Around them, in shadow, 4,000 people are holding their breath. Children who study in that room are asked, once a year, the same question. What would you have done in her place? The good students answer differently every year. The best students answer, I would have walked. If this story moved you, take one breath right now and decide what you would have walked toward today. Then tell me in the comments. Subscribe so the next forbidden one finds you. I will be here.